The observation deck of the Galactic Council Station buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from dozens of species gathered around the massive holographic display. Ambassador Zethkar of the Hegemony shifted his crystalline form, the light refracting through his body, creating dancing patterns on the polished floor. His four eyes focused intently on the tactical readout, showing the human fleet approaching the Verkari blockade. This is madness, hissed Commander Yix through her breathing apparatus, her serpentine form coiled in agitation. The humans cannot possibly believe they can break through a Verkari defensive line. The odds are 37-1 against them. Zethkar had been observing these strange bipedal creatures called humans for the better part of 3 cycles since they had been accepted into the Galactic Council. They were a young species, barely having achieved faster-than-light travel 2 centuries ago, yet they had somehow managed to secure membership through a series of diplomatic maneuvers that still baffled the xenobiologists. The humans were physically unremarkable by galactic standards. They lacked the armored carapaces of the Thurian warriors, the psychic abilities of the Mindari, or the technological sophistication that had taken other species millennia to develop. They were soft, fragile creatures with short lifespans and primitive sensory organs. Most puzzling of all, they seemed to actively seek out conflict rather than avoid it. "Perhaps we should advise them to withdraw," suggested Dr. Kylox, his tentacles writhing with anxiety. The Verkari have never been defeated in direct combat. Their bioships are living weapons, capable of adaptation and regeneration. The humans' metal vessels, no matter how numerous, cannot compete with organic technology. The display showed the human fleet in perfect formation, 112 vessels of various classes, from massive dreadnoughts to nimble fighters. They moved with precision that spoke of endless drilling and coordination. Yet against the Verkari armada of over 4,000 bioships, they appeared woefully inadequate. Zethkar remembered the briefing he had received about this conflict. The colony world of Kepler, 442b, had been settled by human pioneers 3 years ago. It was a marginal world, barely suitable for terraforming, but the humans had claimed it was perfect for agriculture, another of their incomprehensible decisions. The Verkari, an ancient species that had dominated this sector for millennia, had decided the world fell within their sphere of influence and demanded the humans evacuate. The Galactic Council had attempted mediation, but the humans had politely declined all offers of alternative worlds. They had simply stated that Kepler 442b was their home now, and they would not abandon it. The Verkari, and used to such defiance from what they considered a barely civilized species, had assembled their fleet to forcibly remove the human infestation. "Look at their formation," observed General Thakmore, his massive frame hunched over the tactical display. The veteran Korvaxi warrior had fought in over 200 battles across his millennium of life. They're not even attempting to maximize their firepower dispersal. It's almost as if they want to be surrounded. The human fleet had arranged itself in a tight spherical formation around their largest vessel, a kilometer-long dreadnought designated as the UES Determination. It was a puzzling tactical choice that violated every known principle of space combat. By clustering their ships, they had made themselves a concentrated target while limiting their ability to maneuver. "Perhaps they hope to surrender quickly to minimize casualties," suggested Ambassador Krolnoth. "It would be the logical choice for a species that values individual survival." Zethkar wasn't convinced. During his observations, he had noted that humans seemed to have an unusual relationship with logic. They made decisions that appeared irrational, but somehow achieved desired outcomes through methods that defied conventional wisdom. Their entire civilization was built on concepts that more advanced species had long abandoned as inefficient. Concepts like individual freedom, emotional decision-making, and something they called hope. The Verkari fleet emerged from hyperspace like a plague of locusts. Their bioships were nightmare creatures of living metal and flesh, bred for war across countless generations. Each vessel pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that served as communication networks, creating a web of coordination that no mechanical fleet could match. The largest among them, the Broodmaster-class command ships, were over 2 kilometers long and capable of spawning smaller attack craft from their own biomass. The Verkari are broadcasting surrender demands, reported communications officer Drellick. Standard protocol: immediate withdrawal from the system or face total annihilation. The assembled ambassadors leaned forward as the human response came through. It was transmitted on all frequencies, not just to the Verkari, but to every ship and station within sensor range. The voice belonged to Admiral Sarah Chun, the human fleet commander. This is Admiral Chun of the Terran Colonial Defense Fleet. Kepler 442b is under the protection of the United Earth government and its citizens. We reject your demands for evacuation. This world is our home, and we will defend it with everything we have. All civilian vessels are advised to maintain safe distance. To any who would threaten our people, you will find that humans do not yield easily. A ripple of disbelief ran through the observation deck. Commander Yix's tongue flicked out nervously. They cannot be serious. Do they not understand what they face? But Zethkar was studying the holographic display more carefully. The human formation wasn't random. It was deliberate. The smaller ships formed overlapping fields of fire, while the larger vessels provided mobile cover. Most intriguing of all, their energy signatures suggested they were running their reactors far below maximum output. Either they were conserving power for some reason, or they're hiding something, he murmured. The Verkari response was swift and terrible. The bio fleet spread into a massive envelopment formation, their ships moving with the fluid grace of living creatures. Bioluminescent communication patterns flashed across their hulls as they coordinated their attack. The plan was obvious: surround the human fleet and crush it from all directions simultaneously. Verkari fleet is moving to engagement range, reported the tactical officer. Human fleet is maintaining position. Still no change in their energy output. Dr. Kylox's tentacles writhed in distress. They're just sitting there. Don't they realize they need to break formation and scatter? Their only hope is to force individual engagements where their technology might give them some advantage. But the humans didn't move. They held their formation as the Verkari closed in, their ships rotating slowly to maintain optimal firing solutions. On the command frequency, Admiral Chen's voice remained calm and steady as she issued orders to her fleet. All ships maintain formation integrity. Reactor cores to standby status. Weapon systems armed, but do not fire until my command. Remember, we're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for every human who will ever call this world home. General Thakmore's scarred features showed confusion. Their admiral speaks of fighting, but they're not taking any offensive action. What are they planning? The first contact came when the Verkari outer pickets reached weapons range. Bioplasma bolts lanced out from the alien ships, testing the human defenses. The humans responded with precise point defense fire, their automated systems tracking and destroying incoming projectiles with mechanical efficiency. But they made no move to return fire at the Verkari ships themselves. They're demonstrating their defensive capabilities, but not revealing their offensive potential. They want the Verkari to commit fully to the engagement. The Verkari commander apparently reached the same conclusion. The alien fleet suddenly accelerated, their bio ships surging forward in a coordinated assault. Thousands of bioplasma bolts filled space as the aliens opened fire with everything they had. The human point defense systems lit up like stars, creating a defensive barrier around their fleet. Several human ships took hits, their shields flaring and armor plating scarred by bioplasma impacts. But their formation held, and damage reports indicated their losses were minimal. The humans had built their ships to take punishment with redundant systems and armor configurations that prioritize survival over firepower. The Verkari are committing their full strength, observed Commander Yix. If the humans have some hidden advantage, they need to reveal it soon. That's when Admiral Chin's voice rang out across all frequencies again. All ships, we are weapons free. Show them what happens when you threaten human families. What happened next defied everything the assembled observers thought they knew about space combat. The human fleet didn't spread out or attempt to maximize their firing solutions. Instead, they moved closer together, their ships linking defensive fields and creating overlapping zones of protection. And then they opened fire. The energy output that erupted from the human fleet was staggering. Their ships had been running cold, not from technical limitations, but to disguise their true capabilities. Particle beams, plasma cannons, and kinetic projectiles erupted from every human vessel simultaneously. But it wasn't just the firepower that shocked the observers, it was the precision. Every shot was coordinated through a command network that operated at speeds that should have been impossible for biological minds to process. The humans were using their artificial intelligence systems not to replace their decision-making, but to enhance it. Human intuition and tactical creativity were amplified by computer processing power, creating a hybrid intelligence that combined the best of both organic and mechanical thinking. The Valkyrie bio ships, magnificent predators that had dominated space lanes for millennia, suddenly found themselves outmatched. Their adaptive armor, evolved to counter known threats, couldn't adjust fast enough to the variety and intensity of human weapons. Ships that had been bred for regeneration found themselves vaporized too quickly to heal. Impossible, whispered Dr. Kylox. The humans are out-evolving the bio ships in real time. But Zethkar was beginning to understand. The humans weren't just using superior firepower. They were using psychology. They had allowed the Valkyrie to believe they held all the advantages, had let them commit their entire fleet to the engagement before revealing their true capabilities. Now, the bio ships found themselves trapped in close quarters with an enemy that was far more dangerous than they had anticipated. The Valkyrie formation began to collapse as human weapons fire found its marks with devastating accuracy. Bio ships that had ruled the spaceways for generations were being systematically destroyed by an opponent they had dismissed as primitive. The humans pressed their advantage, their fleet moving forward in perfect coordination. Admiral Chin's voice carried across the battlefield once more. This is for every farmer who wants to grow food on Kepler 442b. This is for every child who will play in its fields. This is for every family that calls it home. The assembled observers watched in stunned silence as the human fleet carved through the Valkyrie forces like a blade through flesh. These weren't the actions of a desperate species fighting for survival. This was the methodical execution of a battle plan that had been designed to send a message to the entire galaxy. As the last of the Valkyrie bio ships fell silent, their bioluminescent patterns fading into darkness, Zethkar found himself reassessing everything he thought he knew about humanity. They weren't just another young species struggling to find their place among the stars. They were something far more dangerous. A species that combined primitive emotional drives with advanced technology that used their apparent weaknesses as camouflage for devastating strengths. Commander Yix's serpentine form had gone rigid with shock. How did they know the Valkyrie would attack in such a manner? How did they prepare for this specific engagement? General Thakmore's scarred features showed something that might have been respect. They didn't just prepare for this battle. They prepared for every possible battle. Look at their ship designs, their formation protocols, their weapon systems. Everything is modular adaptable. They build a military doctrine that assumes they will always be outnumbered and outgunned. The human fleet was already moving toward Kepler 442b. Their formation as precise as it had been at the beginning of the engagement, as if the complete destruction of a Valkyrie armada was simply another day's work. Admiral Chin's final transmission was brief and professional. Kepler 442b remains under human protection. Any further aggression against human colonies will be met with appropriate force. As the observation deck began to empty, the various species representatives returning to their quarters to file reports with their governments, Zethkar remained at the holographic display. He was trying to process what he had witnessed, trying to understand the implications for the greater galaxy. The humans had just announced themselves as a major power in galactic affairs, and they had done so in the most unambiguous way possible. They hadn't just defeated the Verkari, they had made it look easy. Every species that had considered humanity a minor irritant would now have to reassess that position. But more disturbing than their military capability was their strategic thinking. The humans hadn't simply won a battle, they had crafted a demonstration. They had allowed themselves to appear weak and outnumbered, had let the Verkari commit to an attack that would be witnessed by the entire galactic community, and then they had revealed capabilities that none of the observers had suspected. It was psychological warfare on a scale that most species couldn't even contemplate. The humans had turned their apparent disadvantages into strategic assets, had used their reputation as a young and inexperienced species to lull their enemies into overconfidence. As Zethkar finally turned away from the display, one thought echoed in his crystalline mind. If this was what humans were capable of when defending a single agricultural world, what would they do when their homeworld was threatened? What sleeping giant had the galaxy just awakened? The answer to those questions would come sooner than anyone expected, and when it did, the galaxy would never be the same. 3 months after the Kepler 442b incident, Ambassador Zethkar found himself in the war room of the Galactic Council's highest security facility. The plasma wraiths emerged from their stellar fortresses for the first time in centuries, their energy beings crackling with barely contained fury. The coalition numbers over 50,000 ships, reported Admiral Vexthal, her chitinous form clicking nervously as she manipulated the tactical display. Intelligence suggests they're planning a direct assault on the Sol system itself. They want to end humanity as a galactic power before they can establish more colonies. Dr. Kylox's tentacles writhed in distress as he absorbed the information. Surely the humans will request assistance from the Council. No single species can face a coalition of this magnitude alone. But Zethkar had been monitoring human communications, and what he had discovered was deeply unsettling. Instead of panic or desperate diplomatic overtures, the human response had been coldly methodical. They had quietly recalled their colonial fleets, activated reserve forces, and begun what they called Operation Prometheus. Most disturbing of all, they had politely declined all offers of assistance from potential allies. The human ambassador to the Council, a middle-aged woman named Director Elizabeth Hawthorne, had delivered their official response with the same calm professionalism that Admiral Chun had displayed during the Kepler 442b engagement. The United Earth government appreciates the Council's concern, but this is a human matter. We will handle it accordingly. General Thakmore, who had become something of an expert on human military doctrine since the Verkari incident, studied the fleet dispositions with growing unease. Their defensive preparations are minimal. They've positioned only small patrol fleets at the outer edges of their territory. It's almost as if they want the coalition to reach Earth unimpeded. Commander Yixhist threw her breathing apparatus. Perhaps they've realized the futility of resistance. No species, no matter how cunning, can stand against half the galaxy united. Zethkar wasn't convinced. His analysis of human behavior patterns suggested they were following the same strategic template that had worked so effectively against the Verkari. They were allowing their enemies to see what they wanted to see, setting up conditions for another devastating reversal. But the scale this time was so much larger that he wondered if even human ingenuity had limits. The coalition fleet began its advance towards Sol with the confidence of inevitable victory. The Verkari had shared detailed intelligence about human weapons and tactics, and the Allied commanders believed they had developed effective countermeasures. Their formation was a masterwork of combined arms doctrine, Korvaxi heavy assault ships protected by Zephyrian reality shields, plasma wraith energy beings providing reconnaissance and electronic warfare, and dozens of other specialized units working in perfect coordination. The humans are evacuating their outer colonies, reported the intelligence officer. Transport ships are heading toward Earth carrying millions of civilians. It appears they're consolidating their population for a final stand. But something about the evacuation patterns bothered Zethkar. The transports weren't moving with the urgency of a desperate retreat. They followed precise schedules, maintained perfect formations, and showed none of the chaos that typically accompanied mass evacuations. If anything, it looked more like a carefully orchestrated redeployment. The first contact between coalition forces and human defenders came at the edge of the Alpha Centauri system. A small human patrol fleet, perhaps 30 ships, encountered the coalition's advanced scouts. The engagement was brief and seemingly one-sided. The human ships fought with their characteristic precision, but they were overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Within hours, the patrol fleet was destroyed, and the coalition forces pressed forward. Human resistance is collapsing ahead of schedule, reported Admiral Vexthal with satisfaction. Their outer defenses are falling faster than our most optimistic projections. General Thakmore frowned at the tactical display. Their ships fought well, but they made no attempt at tactical withdrawal. It's almost as if they were buying time rather than trying to win. The pattern repeated at Proxima Centauri, Wolf 359, and Bernard Star. Small human fleets would appear, fight fiercely for a few hours, and then be overwhelmed by superior numbers. But each engagement followed the same template. The humans would appear to be fighting desperately while actually conducting an orderly retreat, leaving behind debris fields and disabled ships that the coalition forces had to navigate around. They're slowing us down, realized Commander Yix. Each engagement adds hours to our advance, and the debris fields force us to adjust our formation. Dr. Kylox's tentacles fluttered with nervous energy. But to what end? They're trading their frontier fleets for minor tactical delays. When we reach Sol, they'll have nothing left to defend Earth with. That's when the first anomalous readings began appearing on coalition sensors. Energy signatures that didn't match any known human technology were detected throughout the Sol system. The readings were faint and intermittent, but they suggested the presence of massive industrial facilities operating at unprecedented levels of activity. "What are they building?" muttered Admiral Vexthal as she studied the sensor data. The answer came when the coalition fleet finally reached the outer edge of the Sol system. What they found waiting for them defied every expectation and violated several laws of physics. The entire asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter had been converted into a massive military-industrial complex. Hundreds of thousands of asteroids have been hollowed out and turned into automated shipyards, weapons platforms, and manufacturing facilities. The space between them crackled with energy fields that connected the installations into a single, integrated defense network. But that wasn't the most shocking discovery. Floating in perfect formation between Earth and Mars were ships unlike anything in the Coalition intelligence files. They were massive vessels, each over 5 kilometers long, with hull configurations that seemed to shift and adapt as the Coalition fleet watched. The energy signatures coming from these ships suggested power systems that operated on principles beyond current galactic understanding. "How many ships are we looking at?" demanded Admiral Vexthal. The sensor operator's voice was barely a whisper. "Approximately 8,000 vessels, Admiral, and they're all broadcasting the same identification signal, Terran Defense Force." General Thakmore's guard features showed the first signs of real concern. 8,000 ships? Our intelligence indicated they had fewer than 500 vessels total in their entire fleet. Commander Yix's serpentine form coiled in agitation. Where did they come from? How did they build so many ships without anyone detecting the construction? Zethkar was beginning to piece together the scope of what the humans had accomplished. The evacuation of their outer colonies hadn't been a retreat. It had been a massive redeployment of industrial capacity. Every civilian transport had been carrying not just people, but entire manufacturing facilities. The humans had spent months turning their entire civilization into a war machine, while making it look like a desperate defensive consolidation. The human fleet began to move forward, and their formation revealed the true extent of their strategic planning. The massive vessels in the center weren't just ships, they were mobile space stations, each one capable of manufacturing and deploying thousands of smaller combat units. As the coalition watched in growing horror, the human ships began releasing clouds of what appeared to be fighters, but moved with the coordination of a hive mind. "They're not just ships," whispered Dr. Kylox. "They're entire mobile civilizations. Each one of those vessels could support millions of people." Admiral Hawthorne's voice echoed across the battlefield, transmitted on all frequencies with the same calm authority that had become the hallmark of human military communications. "This is Director Hawthorne of the Terran Defense Force. You have entered human space with hostile intent and threatened our homeworld. This aggression will not be tolerated. You have one opportunity to withdraw your forces and depart our territory. We will not offer a second chance." The coalition commanders exchanged glances across their holographic conference. Admiral Vexthol's mandibles clicked with nervous energy. "They still believe they can intimidate us. We outnumber them 6-1, even with these new ships." But General Thackmore was studying the tactical display more carefully. "Look at their formation. They're not trying to protect Earth, they're trying to surround us. Those asteroid installations aren't just shipyards, they're weapons platforms. We're not attacking a defensive position. We've flown into a trap." The coalition's response was swift and decisive. They couldn't retreat now without losing face before the entire galaxy, and their numerical advantage was still overwhelming. The order went out to all units: commence full attack. 50,000 ships, representing 43 different species, surged forward in the largest military engagement in galactic history. What followed was unlike any battle ever recorded. The human defense wasn't a static wall of ships trading shots with an attacking force. Instead, it was a dynamic, constantly shifting network of mobile platforms that adapted to every coalition tactic in real time. The massive human vessels didn't just fight, they manufactured new weapons and countermeasures on the fly, responding to each coalition attack with previously unknown technologies. When the Korvaxi siege engines began their bombardment, human ships deployed quantum field generators that redirected the energy into their own power systems. When the Zephyrian reality warpers attempted to phase coalition ships through human defenses, the Terran Defense Force responded with dimensional anchors that locked local space-time into a stable configuration. Most terrifying of all was the discovery that the human ships weren't crewed in any conventional sense. Each vessel contained thousands of humans, but they weren't operating individual stations or systems. Instead, they were linked through neural interfaces into collective intelligence networks that allowed them to coordinate at speeds no purely biological or mechanical system could match. They've turned their entire species into a single military organism, breathed Commander Yix in horrified fascination. Each ship isn't just a vessel. It's a node in a vast, distributed intelligence. The coalition forces pressed their attack with desperate fury, but every advantage they had counted on was systematically neutralized. Their superior numbers meant nothing when human point defense systems could track and destroy thousands of targets simultaneously. Their technological diversity became a liability when human adaptive systems could analyze and counter new weapons faster than they could be deployed. As coalition ships began falling in increasing numbers, Admiral Vexthal made the decision that military historians would debate for centuries. Rather than order a retreat, she commanded the coalition forces to break formation and assault Earth directly. If they could threaten the human homeworld, perhaps they could force a negotiated surrender. It was exactly what the humans had been waiting for. As the coalition fleet scattered toward Earth, the asteroid belt installations revealed their true purpose. They weren't just weapons platforms. They were components of a massive gravitational manipulation system. With surgical precision, the human installations began generating localized gravity fields that grabbed coalition ships and hurled them into predetermined kill zones. They've weaponized the solar system itself, observed General Thakmore with something approaching professional admiration. They turned their star system into the largest military installation ever constructed. The coalition assault on Earth never reached its target. Before the surviving ships could penetrate the inner solar system, they found themselves facing the final component of humanity's defensive strategy. Earth itself was surrounded by a sphere of defensive platforms that existed in a state of quantum superposition, simultaneously real and not real until the moment they were needed. Admiral Hawthorne's voice carried across the battlefield one final time. You came to our home with thoughts of conquest. You believe that our youth as a species made us weak. You have learned otherwise. Any surviving ships have 60 seconds to begin immediate withdrawal from Terran space. After that time, no quarter will be given. Of the 50,000 ships that had entered the Sol system, fewer than 8,000 were still capable of movement. The coalition commanders, their forces shattered and their tactical doctrines proven inadequate, had no choice but to order a general retreat. The survivors limped back toward their home territories, carrying with them the news that would reshape galactic politics forever. As the observation deck aboard the Council station fell silent, the assembled ambassadors struggled to process what they had witnessed. A single species had not just defeated a coalition representing half the galaxy. They had made it look inevitable. The humans hadn't just won a military victory. They had demonstrated capabilities that redefined what was possible for a space-faring civilization. Zethkar found himself facing an uncomfortable realization. Humanity wasn't just another species among many. They were something fundamentally different, a civilization that could adapt and evolve at speeds that left other species struggling to keep up. They had turned their apparent weaknesses into devastating strengths, had used their youth and inexperience as camouflage for technological capabilities that bordered on the miraculous. But perhaps most disturbing of all was the growing certainty that what they had witnessed wasn't humanity at its peak. It was humanity just getting started. 1 year after what historians would call the Sol Defense, Ambassador Zethkar stood in the council chambers watching something unprecedented unfold. The vast amphitheater that had hosted diplomatic discussions for over 10,000 years was empty except for a handful of species representatives. The Galactic Council, the oldest and most respected institution in known space, was dissolving before his eyes. The human representative, Director Elizabeth Hawthorne, stood at the central podium delivering humanity's final address to the assembly. Her words were measured and respectful, but their implications were reshaping the galaxy's political landscape in real time. The United Earth government has decided to withdraw from active participation in the Galactic Council, she announced. We remain committed to peaceful coexistence with all species, but recent events have made clear that our approach to interstellar relations is incompatible with current council procedures. The few remaining ambassadors exchanged nervous glances. In the years since the coalition's defeat at Sol, the galaxy had transformed beyond recognition. Over half the council's member species had already departed, not in protest, but in desperate attempts to establish independent diplomatic relations with humanity. The balance of power that had maintained galactic stability for millennia had been shattered by a species that was barely 2 centuries old. Zethkar's 4 eyes focused on a holographic display showing the current state of galactic politics. The map told the story more clearly than any diplomatic briefing could. Traditional power blocks had fragmented as species after species sought to align themselves with Earth. The mighty Korvaxi Empire had split into dozens of independent systems. Each tried to negotiate separate trade agreements with human colonies. The Zephyrian Collective had abandoned their isolated stance and were begging for access to human dimensional manipulation technology. How did it happen so quickly? Whispered Dr. Kylox, his tentacles writhing with nervous energy. One battle shouldn't have caused this level of systemic collapse. But Zethkar understood that the Sol Defense had been more than just a military engagement. It had been a demonstration that revealed the fundamental assumptions underlying galactic civilization to be obsolete. For tens of thousands of years, political power had been based on technological advancement accumulated over millennia, military strength measured in ship numbers and energy output, and diplomatic influence rooted in ancient alliances and traditional spheres of control. Humanity had rendered all of those metrics meaningless. They had shown that adaptive capacity was more valuable than accumulated knowledge, that strategic intelligence could overcome numerical disadvantage, and that a species willing to reinvent itself completely could achieve in decades what others required eons to accomplish. Commander Yix's serpentine form coiled in agitation as she studied her own government's latest instructions. The hegemony is ordering me to establish a formal embassy to Earth. They're abandoning 3,000 years of isolation policy for the chance to trade with humans. General Thakmore's scarred features showed a mixture of admiration and frustration. My own military analysts have concluded that our current doctrine is obsolete. They're requesting permission to send observers to human training facilities. We're asking our former enemies to teach us how to fight. The transformation wasn't limited to military and political structures. Human technology, initially dismissed as crude and primitive by galactic standards, was proving to have unexpected advantages. Their approach to artificial intelligence, symbiotic rather than purely mechanical, was revolutionizing fields from medical research to stellar engineering. Their modular industrial systems could adapt to local conditions faster than established manufacturing paradigms could be modified. Most significantly, human social structures were proving remarkably resilient and adaptive. Other species had developed rigid hierarchies and specialized castes over millions of years of evolution. Humans somehow managed to maintain flexibility and innovation while scaling their civilization across multiple star systems. They were simultaneously individualistic and collective, competitive and cooperative, logical and emotional. They're offering us something we've never had before, observed Admiral Vexthal, her chitinous form clicking with nervous energy. Hope for change. Most of our civilizations have been essentially static for thousands of years. We've perfected our technologies, refined our social systems, and achieved stability. But the humans have shown us that stability might actually be stagnation. Director Hawthorne's speech was drawing to a close, but her final words would echo through galactic consciousness for generations to come. Humanity has learned much from our fellow species during our brief time in the galactic community. We are grateful for that education, but we believe the time has come to chart our own course among the stars. We invite any species that shares our vision of continuous growth and adaptation to join us in this endeavor. To those who prefer the certainties of tradition, we respect your choice and wish you well. As the human delegation departed the chambers, Zethkar found himself contemplating the deeper implications of what he had witnessed. The dissolution of the Galactic Council wasn't just a political realignment. It was the end of an era that had lasted for over 50,000 years. The galaxy was entering uncharted territory, and humanity was leading the way into an uncertain but potentially magnificent future. The changes weren't limited to government and military affairs. Reports were coming in from across the galaxy about human colonies that seemed to violate basic principles of planetary development. Traditional terraforming took centuries and followed established protocols designed to create standardized habitable environments. Human colonies were adapting to their worlds rather than adapting their worlds to themselves. On the ice world of Kepler 438b, human settlers had developed symbiotic relationships with native crystalline organisms, creating hybrid ecosystems that were more productive than anything in the xenobiological databases. On the desert planet of Tau Ceti F, humans had learned to work with sandstorm patterns to create energy collection systems that generated power while reshaping the planet's atmospheric dynamics. They're not just colonizing planets, realized Dr. Kylox. They're creating entirely new forms of civilization. Each human world is developing unique characteristics that build on local conditions rather than imposing standard templates. But perhaps the most unsettling development was the stream of refugees from traditional galactic civilizations who were requesting asylum in human space. Members of rigidly structured societies were abandoning millennia of genetic and cultural conditioning to seek opportunities for individual growth and adaptation that their homeworlds couldn't provide. The Mindari Telepathic Collective had lost over 30% of its population to human colonies that offered psychic individuals the chance to develop their abilities independently. The Thurian warrior caste was hemorrhaging members to human military units that valued tactical innovation over adherence to ancient combat rituals. Even the notoriously insular plasma wraiths were sending delegations to learn about human energy manipulation techniques. We're witnessing the voluntary dissolution of galactic civilization, observed General Thakmore with something approaching awe. Species that have maintained their cultural identity for millions of years are choosing to abandon it for the chance to become something new. Zethkar was reviewing intelligence reports that painted an even more dramatic picture. Human space was expanding at an unprecedented rate, but not through conquest or territorial expansion. Instead, they were establishing research stations, trading posts, and diplomatic facilities throughout previously empty regions of space. They were building infrastructure for a civilization that didn't exist yet, preparing for possibilities that other species couldn't even imagine. Most disturbing of all were the reports from the galactic core, where ancient species that hadn't been heard from in tens of thousands of years were stirring. The architects, who had supposedly transcended physical existence eons ago, had sent probe ships toward Sol. The gardeners, mysterious beings who had seeded life throughout the galaxy before vanishing into myth, were showing signs of activity for the first time in recorded history. "Something is awakening," whispered Commander Yix. "The humans have done more than just upset the political balance. They've attracted attention from powers we thought were extinct." As if summoned by their conversation, Director Hawthorne's image appeared on the Chamber's communication system. Her message was brief, but carried implications that made every remaining ambassador's blood run cold. "This is Director Hawthorne with an urgent communication for all galactic civilizations. We have detected massive energy signatures emerging from the galactic core. Preliminary analysis suggests these are artificial constructs of immense size and power, far beyond anything in current databases. We believe these may be remnants of the precursor civilizations that predate all current galactic species." The assembled representatives stared at each other in growing horror. The precursors were legendary beings who had supposedly ruled the galaxy millions of years ago before vanishing mysteriously. Most species consider them mythical, but human deep space sensors were apparently sophisticated enough to detect things that everyone else had missed. "We are sharing this information with all interested parties," Hawthorne continued. "Based on current trajectory calculations, these constructs will reach the galactic rim within 10 standard years. We recommend immediate coordination of research and defensive efforts among all spacefaring civilizations." But even as she offered cooperation, Hawthorne's next words revealed the true scope of human strategic thinking. "The United Earth government has initiated Project Genesis, a comprehensive program to establish self-sufficient colonies beyond the galactic rim. We will not abandon the galaxy, but we believe in preparing for all possibilities. Any species interested in participating in this endeavor is invited to establish diplomatic contact." Zethkar felt his crystalline form shimmer with realization. The humans weren't just responding to an immediate threat. They were planning for the possibility that the galaxy itself might become uninhabitable. While other species were still trying to understand what was happening, humanity was already preparing for outcomes that might not occur for decades or centuries. "They're not just thinking ahead of the current crisis," he murmured. "They're thinking ahead of crises that haven't happened yet. They're planning for scenarios the rest of us can't even imagine." Dr. Kylox's tentacles writhed in distress as he absorbed the implications. Project Genesis, they're talking about evacuating entire civilizations to extragalactic space. The energy requirements alone would exceed the total output of most stellar systems. General Thakmore's scarred features showed grudging respect, but they've already demonstrated they can manipulate matter and energy in ways we thought impossible. If any species could actually accomplish something like this, it would be them. As reports continued to flow in from across the galaxy, a pattern emerged that defied conventional understanding. The humans weren't just preparing for an uncertain future. They were actively creating multiple possible futures and developing contingency plans for each one. They were simultaneously building defenses against the precursor constructs, establishing evacuation routes to extragalactic space, and developing technologies that might make both options unnecessary. Commander Yix's voice carried a note of desperate hope. Perhaps this is what we needed. A crisis large enough to force us to evolve beyond our traditional limitations. The humans have shown us that change is possible. Maybe now we can learn to adapt before it's too late. But Zethkar was studying deeper implications in the data streams flowing through Council channels. The precursor constructs weren't just massive, they were actively scanning civilized star systems, as if searching for something specific. The energy signatures suggested intelligence of a scope and complexity that made even the most advanced current species look primitive by comparison. What if the humans have already made contact? He wondered aloud. What if they know something about these precursors that they're not sharing? Their response is too coordinated, too prepared. It's almost as if they were expecting this. The thought sent ripples of unease through the assembled ambassadors. If humanity had indeed established communication with the precursor constructs, the implications were staggering. They might be facing not just the return of ancient powers, but the emergence of an alliance between the galaxy's oldest intelligence and its youngest. As the council chambers emptied for what might be the final time, each representative carrying news that would reshape their civilizations, Zethkar remained at his post. He was trying to process the scope of what was unfolding, trying to understand how a species that had seemed so unremarkable just a few years ago had become the catalyst for galactic transformation. The answer, he realized, wasn't in their technology or their military capabilities. It was in their fundamental approach to existence. While other species had sought perfection and stability, humans had chosen adaptation and growth. While others had tried to control their environment, humans had learned to dance with uncertainty and chaos. They had shown the galaxy that evolution didn't stop with the achievement of spaceflight. In fact, it was just beginning. And as the ancient powers stirred in the galactic core and impossible challenges loomed on the horizon, Zethkar found himself grateful that there was at least one species ready to meet the future head-on, no matter what it might bring. The humans had entered the galactic stage as apparent primitives and revealed themselves as prophets of transformation. They had taken a galaxy full of ancient, static civilizations and shown them that there were still new possibilities waiting among the stars. Whether that transformation would lead to salvation or catastrophe remained to be seen, but one thing was certain: the galaxy would never be the same again. As Zethkar finally departed the empty council chambers, his last thought was both terrifying and oddly comforting. Whatever was coming, humanity would find a way to survive it. And in doing so, they might just save everyone else as well.